Today's stories are a bit weird, and viewer discretion is advised because some of them do explore some sensitive topics. And of course, if you have a story you would like to send to my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And as always, thank you. This happened to me nearly a decade ago, but I still remember it vividly as I still have no explanation for it. I grew up in a small town that had a single grocery store. The elementary school was also the church, and they built a new middle school while I was still living there, and the high school was in another district. The most exciting thing to happen there was when a new pizza place was built, and that they delivered. It was mostly agricultural land, so there wasn't much there in ways of entertainment, especially for teenagers. So, needless to say, I moved after graduating. At the time, I was going to college. I was living in a cozy little studio apartment and was broke. So, during the holiday break, I liked to go back home to gorge myself on free food and gather plenty of leftovers to last me at least a week. I had the drive pretty down. In fact, it took me about an hour and 38 minutes, give or take a few I'm sure depending on lights and traffic. My car told me the time and mileage that it took for each drive after shutting it off, so after this incident, I had tracked it and remembered it since. Anyways, the drive out there was fine. Same with the visit. I left the following Friday in order to get home and have a few days to recoup before I went back to school. I left a little after 7 p.m., as it was already dark outside. There also weren't a lot of streetlights, so I would be relying heavily on my headlights. I headed out, putting on an album that I knew would actually last most of the drive. However, I didn't get very far. It was about 40 minutes into the drive, and I definitely had already passed the city where my high school was, and the football field behind it. I was on the back roads because there were hardly ever any cars taking them that late. I liked taking this way because I could go a little over the speed limit without worries of cops. Say whatever you want about that. As I was driving, probably getting a little bit too into the song that was playing, I started getting a flashing check engine light. My worst nightmare. I had a fairly new car and I kept up on the maintenance, hence part of the reason I was broke, so I had no idea what it could be. I pulled over to the non-existent shoulder and put on my flashers. I went to the hood, using the little flashlight I kept in my glove box to see if I could clearly see a problem. I don't know jack about cars. So, I checked the oil, and when I saw that it seemed full, and there was nothing that sprayed everywhere and no smoke, I was out of ideas. At this point, I had walked back to get into my car, wondering if I should call AAA, or just my dad and make him make the drive into the middle of nowhere to check it out. I decided I would call my dad first, to see if he wanted to come out here, or if he would rather that I just have it towed back to their place. I looked down to dial out, and then looked up to see what I thought were headlights coming towards me. I thought maybe they would be kind enough to stop and could help, so I hesitated on dialing out and just kept looking forward. And that's when I saw the most bizarre thing happen with those lights. Instead of seeing them slowly get closer and closer to my side, they seemed to stop and do a parallel move so that they were directly in front of me. It was like the car was in the opposite lane and was pushed back from the side to be in front of me, ready to play chicken. It caught me off guard. But then the last thing that I remember was the two headlights then turned into a whole row of them. It had to have been like 6 or 10 in a row, and they were blinding. I held my hand up to block them, and that was the last thing that I remembered. The next thing I remember after that was waking up feeling cold and wet. It wasn't until I stood up and looked around that I realized where I was. I was back in the school's football field that I had already passed. I gave myself a once-over to make sure I still had all of my limbs, that I wasn't in pain or anything. Just really shaken up, for obvious reasons. I had no idea how I had gotten there, or what happened. I didn't even have my phone on me. The only thing I could do was walk to the road until I could find my car again. I figured that would take less time to walk to my car than back to my parents' place. It did take me some time, and as expected, no car ever drove by. But I saw my car with the lights still on. I had never been happier to see it. I got my second wind and pretty much jogged all the way to my car, getting in and locking all the doors. Then I grabbed my phone to check the time. It had been 4 hours. I left around 7, and it was past 11 at this point. I had a text from my sister asking if I had made it home okay, as well as a missed call from her. But that wasn't all. There was also a call out that was made to my dad's phone, but it was less than a second. It was like I had called and immediately hung up. And the time matched about the time that I would have pulled over. So, I was legitimately missing 4 hours of time, and I couldn't recall anything. I sat there for a while trying to bring the events back, but nothing ever came to me. And in case anyone was curious, I had not been drinking, I wasn't high, and I hadn't used anything, and I wasn't on any medications. I've never had medical issues that would cause me to pass out, either. I called my sister and told her that I'd had car troubles, and totally forgot to message her when I got home. I got home that night, and I hardly slept. I was still trying to figure out what had happened. I had to tell somebody about it though, so I called my sister the next day and talked to her. I didn't want to worry my parents, and my sister was like my diary, so I told her everything. She also thought it was super weird, and totally believed me for whatever reason. I know that if someone told me this story, I would be hesitant to believe it as well. I took my car in later that week for a free checkup, and they said they saw nothing wrong with it. They also pulled the error reports, and it had no record of ever throwing on the check engine light, which confused me even further. That was the only reason I had pulled over to begin with. I still haven't told my parents because they are old school, so I don't think they would believe it. But I have told a few of my friends who said they thought it could have been an abduction. To that day, I had always believed that there had to be something out there. There's no way that we're the only intelligent life in this whole universe, but I think that really solidified it for me. That's the only thing I tell myself that makes sense, because otherwise, I have nothing. I'm open to hear any interpretations that you or your listeners might have, though, and thank you for sharing my experience. This actually occurred to my mother, but it's something that I've always held on to since she told me. I know it probably wasn't easy for her to recall and talk about it, but I am thankful that she did. So forgive me if I'm missing a few pieces here or there, or if it's a bit out of order as I'm trying to recall everything she told me. And when I was about 5, my parents tried for a second kid to have a boy and a girl. My mom had a medical issue that made getting pregnant difficult for them, but it didn't knock them down. After several failed attempts, they learned that she was pregnant, and went to the normal appointments to make sure the baby and mom were safe and healthy. Everything was going fine, too. No complications with the pregnancy. until about the time that they learned the gender. It was going to be another boy, but they were still very thankful to have a second on the way, so no big deal. But my mom had started having some pretty weird dreams, or more so nightmares. She never really talked about them with my dad or anyone, other than just saying that she'd had a weird dream, because she never really thought about it. At least, she didn't until it became a recurring dream. In the dream, she always appeared to be lying on what she thought looked like a hospital bed in an all-white room. The walls were white, and there were several large spotlight-style lights hanging all around, to where she couldn't see anything else in the room. She could tell that there were people or figures in the room as they were human-shaped, but could never see their faces. They always seemed to be standing in front of the lights, so all she could see were the outline of a head, shoulder, arms, and torsos down to the legs. She did say that she had never gotten off the bed. She doesn't remember if she ever tried and just couldn't, or just never attempted. But because of this, she thinks either the bed was really low to the ground, or with the lights being behind them, it distorted the figures. Either that, or their arms were freakishly long, as it looked like from where they were standing, their arms seemed to almost reach the ground. The first few times she had this dream, she just laid there, and kept asking where she was and who they were. She said that all she could hear was some kind of whispering, but it wasn't in a language that she was familiar with, at least. My mom is fluent in English, Spanish, and knows enough Italian to be able to tell if it was any of those, to which she says it wasn't. I know there are thousands of languages out there, but she said it just didn't seem real. It was almost just gibberish to her. However, one other thing that my mom was fluent in was ASL, American Sign Language. My maternal grandparents and one of my uncles were deaf, so it was something that she had learned growing up. She noticed that the figures were using their hands a lot, and she could make out some motions that they were making. So she gave it a shot and asked them again what was going on in sign language. To her surprise, she got a response. They told her they didn't know that she could understand them, and she explained how she knew ASL and again asked who they were. They did not answer her, but they said they were trying to figure out what to do with the baby. She was confused at first, but said that she finally realized they meant her baby, that she was carrying. She asked them if he was okay or if there was something wrong, but all they said was, "It does not belong to you." She said that this was typically where the dream ended. She would wake up confused but not scared or anything and would go about her day. She said that she started having this dream almost every night, and she tried to get more and more information from them, but the answers were few and far in between. The ones that she remembers vividly, that always scared her, were the ones where she was being told the baby doesn't belong to her, that he needed to go with them, and that he would be safer with them. She started getting increasingly upset and yelling at them, saying that he was hers and that she wasn't going to let anyone take him or harm him. And they would typically end up sedating her, and then she would wake up. After waking up more than a few times, disheveled and upset, my dad started asking her about these dreams. They then brought it up to the doctor, simply explaining that she was having nightmares about Ken. His name was Kenneth. And they just suggested changing up her diet, thinking that that could be affecting her sleep. She did just that. She changed how she was eating and when, but the dreams did not stop. In fact, they seemed to get worse. She said the figures would approach her and seemed to pinch her everywhere. Her arms, her chest, her face and legs. They all burned as it felt like she was being pinched all over. But when she would wake up, there were no marks anywhere on her body. Then, at about 34 weeks, I believe it was, she had a different dream. This time, one of the figures spoke in English, and they told her it was time and that she should say her goodbyes right now. She remembered an overwhelming feeling of grief, but she had no fight in her. She laid there staring at them. After some time, the room went dark and she watched the figures all walk out of sight. And that's when she woke up and told my dad that she needed to go to the hospital. She said that she didn't know why, but she felt like something was wrong. They got to the hospital and did a sonogram, and they noticed that there was no movement and no heartbeat. They did an emergency C-section, but he was gone, and nothing they could do would bring him back. That night, my little brother, Ken, passed. They said that it was basically a stillbirth situation, and that there was nothing my mom could have done to cause or prevent it. It was a hard time for my parents, especially trying to explain to me, I'm sure, as I didn't understand what was going on. I sadly don't remember much of the situation, being so young at the time. But the strangeness actually did not end there. My mom stopped having those dreams until about a week or so after his death. She had one more dream, but this time it was different. This time, she was sitting in the nursery chair that was in Ken's room. She saw the same dark figure appear in the room, but this time, there were no bright lights. They were just dark with no features. One of them was holding a small baby in their arms wrapped in some kind of blanket. She knew immediately, though, that it was Ken. She said that one of them thanked her for him, and that he would be well taken care of. Even though she told me this as an adult, it honestly terrified me. However, she said that she had never been more at peace than in that situation. She simply asked to hold him, and they obliged. She recalled while telling me this that how you would normally feel someone's arms or hands as you pass a baby to or from them, she didn't feel anything but Ken. She took Ken from them, and she said she held him for what seemed like hours. Nothing around her mattered in that moment. After some time, she heard the figure that spoke say it was time to go, and that she would never see them again. Then, she heard a small child's voice say, "I'm okay. I love you." And then they were gone. She said that when she woke up that morning, she felt rested. She felt like she had clarity, and that she was ready to move forward. She said that she explained this dream to my dad, and it definitely affected him differently. He went through the normal grief stages, from what my mom said, but at the end of it all, she knew everything was okay. And she did her best to convince my dad of that too. Even though she seemed to be at peace with the situation, they both agreed that they did not want to try again. Since my mom already had medical issues, not to mention the traumatic dreams, she didn't want to risk it. She had only shared this dream in detail with my dad and her one close friend. She was too afraid of what others would think of her, or if someone would try to take me away as she was unstable or something. But I am thankful that she shared it with me, even though it scared the hell out of me too. To this day, there is still no explanation for any of it, and it's the biggest mystery of our family. I think that I would like to believe my mom's side of things on this one, though, and believe that Ken is okay. Or that he at least didn't suffer anything, and maybe one day I'll meet him again. I have something that happened to me way back when I was around 12. This would have been back in the 80s, and I can safely say that I wasn't under the influence of anything. I never hallucinated, and I'm 100% certain that this was not a dream or me sleepwalking, or anything like that. I also don't have any mental illnesses other than depression, so that doesn't explain what happened either. This all happened to me, And while it may sound crazy or weird to others, it is my truth, and I know what I experienced. I'm not trying to over-defend myself. I'm just used to being told that it's not real, or that I was just dreaming, when I know for certain that I wasn't. I have to give some details that may seem irrelevant to the story in order to fully explain my mindset and what I was going through. So hopefully that doesn't turn anyone off from the story. When I was a baby, my mother put me up for adoption. And while I absolutely applaud the adoption and foster system nowadays, I will say that back then there were definitely places and people that abused the system. Because of this, some kids slipped through the cracks, and I was one of those kids. I was adopted, and when I was no longer the cute little baby, my adopted mother gave me up again. I was then with an older couple that took pretty good care of me, but she had ended up passing away unexpectedly, and he had a major cancer diagnosis that left him bedridden, which led to me ending back up in the system. So, by the time I was 11, I was already in my 4th family. And when you're a preteen girl just trying to understand the world, nothing makes you feel like you're unwanted like being tossed around like that. I felt like I didn't belong, and like nobody loved me. And I was counting down the days until they gave me back up for adoption, and I would have to move to a new home. I say home, but none of them were ever actually home for me. To top it off, that family wasn't the best. I was one of 4 adopted kids, and I was a middle child. I was very much treated like a middle child, ignored and left to fend for myself. I know that this is sounding like a pity story, and maybe it is, but at the age that I was, as mentioned, I was feeling like I was unwanted. Because I was feeling that way, I decided that I would run away and try to make my way in the world on my own. I decided that I would be better off homeless at the age of 12, which, thinking back, is terrifying. So I packed up my backpack full of clothes and food that I had taken from the cabinets, and one night, I decided that I was just going to leave. If I made it somewhere new, then great, and if I didn't make it, then so be it. I grabbed my pack and I snuck out of my bedroom window into the backyard, and I made my way down the road and eventually into the woods. Now, I will say that the entire time I was running away, I was being hit with a lot of emotion. At first, I was excited about what I could do, but I was overrun with those sad thoughts that this was going to be my life from here on out. That I was just going to live in the woods with no family, eating snack cakes and Oreos from my backpack. Again, I was 12, so I didn't really understand what being homeless would entail, but it was still depressing. The whole time, though, I was kind of feeling like I was hearing voices trying to talk to me. Voices that I could not recognize. They were faint, and there were a lot of them, and it was actually starting to make me feel scared. I was standing in the middle of a woods in a suburb several blocks away from home, and I was starting to hear voices. This is when the real event actually happened. I was standing there, starting to hyperventilate and panic, and I was struck by what I can only explain as the brightest light I have ever seen. This was in the woods. There were no lights anywhere near me, the only exception being the flashlight in my hand. The light was hovering over me and glowing the brightest white that I have ever seen, to the point that it was almost blinding me. At first I was obviously scared of it, but after a couple of seconds, something about it made me feel less afraid and more like I should embrace the light. I wanted to reach out to it. I wanted to lift my arms and hug it, and I even started doing so. That was when I heard one of the voices telling me to stop. I could tell that this voice was coming from whatever this light was, and that it was talking directly to me. I stood there just staring at it, and it finally did speak to me again. It told me that I'd had a choice. It said that I could choose to go with it, and that I would never feel pain again, or that I could go home with the promise that things would get better. This may sound really strange to some, and it was strange to me at the time, but I knew that this thing was telling the truth. That what it was offering to me were my two options, and whichever I chose would be what happened. I remember just staring at it, thinking about whether or not I wanted it all to end, or if I wanted things to get better and to try to keep going. What scares me is that, deep down, I knew that if I went with it, that I would die. That it would take me into the afterlife. And I was a 12-year-old girl thinking about whether or not that was what I wanted. After a while, I remember telling it that I wanted to go home, and it told me that it would take me there. At that moment, I blinked, and as soon as I opened my eyes, I was lying in my bed, and the sun was starting to come up. I remember just lying there and staring at my ceiling for what felt like hours, thinking about what had happened. I could remember every detail of the light, how warm it was, how the brightness was blinding, and I could remember the sound of the voice that spoke to me. All of it was real. It was not a dream, and I have no explanation for what the hell it was that I experienced. Part of me thinks that it may have been a guardian angel of some sort, though I don't think that guardian angels typically offer to end your life if you want to. But that was the only thing that I can think of, other than some sort of ethereal being that was just there at the right time and knew what I was going through. What's interesting to me is that things did get better. I no longer felt like I was unwanted. My parents seemed to care a bit more about me, and they never did put me back up for adoption or anything like that. I would go as far as saying that after that night, my parents loved me, and they treated me as such. I don't know if it was just a trick of my mind and I was just realizing all of this, or if this thing had some influence on my reality. But things did get better for me. Whatever it was, it gave me that option for a second chance at life. And I'm actually glad that I chose to go home. I moved into this tiny little rental about 6 years ago. It was a 2-bedroom duplex, and it was quite the steal in my opinion. The rent was cheap, the place was in good condition, and even the property managers seemed pretty nice. I got all unpacked and was feeling pretty good with my choice of my new home. It wasn't until about 6 months in or so that I started experiencing things. It started as things just disappearing, like my keys, my jewelry, my glasses, just little things like that. But then, they would end up in other places that I would never have left them. I had a dish in the bathroom that I put my rings in, or I would put them on the windowsill in the kitchen if I took them off in there. Otherwise, they were on me or in my jewelry box. My keys hung on the rack next to my door, or they were in my purse. And I always had my glasses on unless I showered or went to bed. Then they would be in their case in my bedroom. There were a few times that I found my rings sitting evenly spread out on the kitchen table. If I were to have left them on that table, why would I have left them spread out like that? I once found my keys in the bathroom and under my couch. And I even found my glasses neatly folded and balancing on a pillow on the couch. And that was after I had went to bed. Again, I wouldn't take them off in the living room and then walk to my bedroom. Now, I am open-minded to the paranormal, and so I thought maybe someone was upset that I was here, Or maybe they were just lonely and happy to have company since the house had been vacant for a few years. It was a house that had been abandoned and was redone and turned into a duplex. I wasn't told about any details that happened there, but to be honest, I was still young. I don't know if that's a law across the US, that deaths have to be disclosed to new tenants, or if that's only if you buy the place versus renting like I was doing. So, I just tried to talk to them, if anything was there. I told them I wanted to share the home with them, and I thanked them for coexisting. You know, trying to be as generous and friendly to them as I could be. I mean, they'd been mostly harmless so far. Yet, things got worse. The events that I witnessed started becoming more emotion-fueled. My windows opened upward and they never had trouble staying open before, but then they would slam shut. Same with the doors. They never swung open or closed on their own, but now they would suddenly move. It seemed to particularly like my bedroom door. It wanted it to remain open because every time I would close it, it would come open. I'd had a few cups and plates fly off the counter as well. These were the things that I tried to ignore and not feed into, or show any fear. But I still tried to be reasonable. As reasonable as you can be with a spirit, right? But the one thing I couldn't shake were the dreams. I never seemed to remember them when I woke up, but I do remember waking with my heart racing, breathing heavily, and feeling scared. But I never knew why. I would go check to make sure all the doors and windows were locked and try to go back to bed. And no matter what I wore to bed, I was always freezing when I woke up. It was such a strange feeling. So, I know that this was probably stupid to be doing alone, but I didn't really have anyone around to do this with. My boyfriend was at work, friends were busy with life, and I didn't want to bother them with something like this anyways. But I held a seance by myself, hoping to better understand the spirits that I was feeling, or at least try to calm them. Unfortunately, all I got was this feeling like someone was watching me and was disappointed. Not really angry, just upset, I guess. So, I finished up, I watched a movie and then went to bed. That's when things got really strange for me. It felt like a dream at first that I was watching play out in front of me, but then I realized where I was in this dream. I was in my very own bedroom. I was standing against the wall, facing the foot of my bed. It was dark except for the glow from the moon and the streetlights coming into my window. But the problem with this was that there was somebody in my bed. And that person was also me. I was wearing the same thing I had went to bed in, which was a tank top, and my fuzzy Rugrats pajama pants. My hair was in one single braid, just as I had done right before I went to bed. And as I stood there, looking down at myself sleeping, I then saw a large, dark, looming figure standing next to my bed, close enough to touch me. We both stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching myself sleep, watching my chest rise and fall, making sure I wasn't struggling to breathe or something. Then, I turned my attention to the thing standing over me. I was trying to make something out of it. A person that I recognized, or even didn't, hoping to make sense out of what exactly I was seeing. But then, I could see the shape of the head, slowly turning to look towards me, and in that moment, I felt the most overwhelming sense of dread that I had ever felt in my life. At that moment, I just wanted to cry and scream, but I couldn't move a muscle. I watched on, terrified for myself, and what exactly was about to happen to me. Right then, I saw what I assumed to be the figure's arms wrap around me, then its legs, until it seemed to engulf me in darkness. Something finally broke free and I was able to overcome the paralysis as I ran to my side, barely able to see myself at this point. Without thinking, I reached down and grabbed my own shoulder. At that moment, I remember waking up, after feeling something touch my shoulder. I felt myself touch my own shoulder. I reached up and turned on my head rest light and looked around the room. No one else was there. It was just me. And again, I was freezing. I was terrified at this point and just started crying. I think I probably turned on every single light in that place, and I sat curled up on my couch in the living room with the TV on some kind of cartoon. My boyfriend worked overnights at that point, so I called him freaking out, and I explained what had just happened. He wasn't one to dismiss my thoughts and beliefs, but I think he was just trying to do whatever he could to calm me down. And he said something about it probably being some kind of sleep paralysis or lucid dream, since it seemed so real. But I'm not convinced that it was a dream. I remember standing on the cold hardwood floor. I remember feeling the ridges in the wall against my back. I remember listening to my shallow, shaky breaths. And I remember the feeling of my own hand on my own shoulder, and the sense that someone was shaking me awake. My boyfriend was going on his lunch break soon, and I wasn't going to be sleeping at all, so I decided to bring him something to eat to get my mind off of it. When I got there, we talked about it a little more, and I guess I must have looked pretty convincing because I remember the concerned look on his face, and him offering to stay over with me. He lived with friends, so it was a lot less awkward to stay at my place instead of his. I stayed there for a few hours, until I went out to my car and fell asleep. He ended up getting out an hour early, and he followed me back to my place. We slept on my couch that night, however, as I didn't even want to go into my bedroom. I decided to sage the whole place the next day. I had trouble sleeping there alone from that moment on, as I always felt a strong presence, like someone was there with me. I was typically fine during the day, but I struggled at night. My boyfriend was planning on moving in with me after he'd finished working overnights, but we expedited that process because I just could not do it anymore. I felt pathetic not wanting to be alone in my own home. I didn't renew my lease after that year. The rent was great, and the place was gorgeous and in a fantastic area, but it was not good for my health. I still have no explanation for that night, because I've never heard of an experience where you can see and feel yourself. If anyone else has experienced anything similar, I would love to hear it, because I've never found an answer. But, at least, I never experienced that again. So this was a collection of some genuinely strange, unexplained horror stories. I've done a few of these in the past, and they always do pretty well. And really, in my opinion, these are some of the most bizarre stories that I've ever told. That goes for all three of three volumes of this unexplained stories. They are just genuinely strange. And I don't know if I'd call them paranormal, supernatural, something like that. I don't know, but I really do appreciate them. And I actually do quite like these stories, so obviously, I hope that you all like them as well. And if you do, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and like stories like this and want more, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're really feeling bold, go down to the comments and leave me a comment. How are you doing? How am I doing? Answer that question for me. How am I doing? How is Raven doing? Like, you tell me how I'm doing, and I'll do it. We'll figure out the logistics later. It really doesn't matter. Yeah. I hope you all are having a beautiful day, honestly, and I hope that your weekend just goes well. I really do. And, yeah. I really don't feel like talking, to be honest with you. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. Remember, friends, you are loved, you are important, you are valid, you're the best you that you can be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love and sleep well.